If you want to participate, contact me at ordinarywomenpodcast@gmail.com. I'm sure you have great projects to brag about. You can also follow me and message me on Instagram at ordinarywomenpodcast, on Twitter at ordinarywomenpc, or on Facebook on the page Ordinary Women. Hello everyone, welcome to a new episode of Ordinary Women. I'm welcoming Mariam today. Hi Mariam, thank you so much for being here.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
I'm really excited. Can you start by giving us a quick introduction of yourself, please?
Yes, I sort of did this yesterday because I was at an event, so I've got my elevator pitch ready.
Nice.
So my name's Mariam. I am Armenian. I've been living in London for the last 13 years. Growing up, I lived in a few different countries, which is fun, I suppose, because I picked up a few languages along the way. Speak 5 languages. I'm always trying to learn the 6th, but it's really, really hard to learn a language as an adult. I work in tech recruitment. I have a small company that partners with startups, helps them grow in new markets, find the right people, to ensure that they grow their product. And recently we also started working with candidates. In the last 6 months, we help them get that ideal job offer and, secure the job that they deserve.
Really, really cool. I'm really excited to hear more about all of this. Is there anything unusual about you?
Oh boy, that's so subjective, isn't it? Is there anything unusual about me? Most of the time I think not really. I'm just your ordinary millennial woman. But then when I talk to my friends, they do make these comments which makes me think maybe it is unusual. I think the fact of the trajectory of life that I've had so far, it's somewhat unusual, having lived in 4 different countries growing up, from Southeast Asia to Europe to Russia, trying to start and establish a business in London, I think, as a young female entrepreneur, as much as I don't like that word, is possibly somewhat unusual. And just the path of coming to London as a international student at school, and then moving to university, and then trying to find your way and secure your work permit, which, by the way, is one of the hardest things ever. Yeah, all of that could possibly be unusual. Yeah,
definitely. I hope we get to hear more about it throughout this discussion.
Absolutely.
Obviously, here in this podcast, we talk a lot about what it's like to be a woman. Was there an event or a moment in your life when you realized that you are a woman?
Oh, that's such a good question. I think from a very, very young age, actually, because growing up in the society that I grew up in, or in the family maybe that I grew up in, there was a lot of emphasis on my looks. So there was a lot of emphasis on, the kind of compliments that we give to children, which I think now our generation is certainly more observant of these things. But growing up, I heard a lot of compliments about my looks. So that sort of became my identity early on. You're pretty, you're beautiful, you're cute, this and that. And I think that's what made me aware from a young age that I was... not that men can't be pretty, but, so there was a lot of emphasis on that. And I knew, and I took that at face value. Quite young. I would say probably from the age of 6, 7. Because actually when I was 5, I went to school in Paris. We were living in France. And I did not feel that difference as significantly. Funny, I should say, my head was shaved, so maybe that helped to not focus on looks too much. I didn't feel that difference in sexes or gender in France, but when we returned to Armenia and I went to school and my hair grew out and I started hearing all these compliments, that's when I knew that yes, I am a girl, I am a young lady. And yeah, I'm sure we'll talk more about this, how we raise our girls, how we raise women, but there is a lot of commentary that I heard, and maybe to this day even, about how you sit and how you behave and what a good girl you are. And certainly those made me feel like a young woman.
Yeah, I had never thought about that well also, because I'm not planning on having children, but I see sometimes these videos of people being like, oh, I noticed this difference between how they talk to my son versus daughter. And also I don't know wherever you were when at different points of your life, but I remember at least in France when I was young, like, you know, these, and I think they still make it like these t-shirt or jumpers for children, like on the girl side it's like I'm a beautiful princess, I blah blah, whereas the male are like I'm the strong whatever. It's like,
and I think the funny thing is, you know, we don't do it on purpose per se. I mean, I'm not kind of blaming anyone at all in that society, and if anything, those comments come out as well intended, you know. I find myself, I remember when I was babysitting as a student in London and, you know, spending time with children, it's almost you know, you don't think about the words that come out. You want to say something nice to the child, and the first thing that comes to your mind is, you know, you look so great today, and, you know, you're beautiful, you're cute, because you want them to have. And all those compliments growing up really gave me very good level of self-esteem and confidence. So that's also something I'm thankful for. But I think there just needs to be a balance of complimenting effort and complimenting activity, and not just things that, you know, beauty is... you have it today and you might not have it tomorrow, and it's super subjective and shouldn't be a core of your identity anyway.
That's also very different for girls and boys, which is so annoying. But yeah.
Yes.
And growing up, did you have any female role models?
Well, again, a very interesting question. I had a very good balance of men and women in my life, and there were a lot of things in men that I admired, and there were a lot of things in women that I admired. Looking back in hindsight, I do realize that if we're talking about professional role models, I did not have sufficient professional role models. I mean, the women that I looked up to for many reasons, you know, from which I've learned a lot, are my mother, my grandmothers, and, you know, the women in my family who I love and admire, Armenian women in particular, simply because I think there is such a sense of all-capable, multitasking superwoman. That's what I've seen, really, you know, a woman that is... Well, we can talk about how bad this is also, that that idea of the perfect woman who keeps a very clean home and raises her kids and a very happy husband and works and earns and all of that. But that's what I grew up seeing. So in a way I looked up to these women around me, but from a professional point of view, not really. I do, in hindsight, I often think, you know, could my life have been different if I saw around me women from STEM? Certainly could have been very different, because that's not, for instance, a career that I ever considered, simply because, you know, that question of representation is just so incredibly important. You don't know what you don't know. So if I had seen women around me who were engineers and, you know, developers and architects, and not your typical social sciences background, that could have interested me, or that could have been nurtured at school, but that's not what I saw. So I do wonder often about that. I mean, when I was a kid and I was thinking about what I want to do when I grow up one day, I had different ideas. I remember I wanted to be a plastic surgeon. I wanted to be a diplomat. Wow. And, you know, my parents never put any limitations or restrictions on us or on me when it came to career choice. On the contrary, they were very, very focused on giving us the best education and, you know, possibilities and choice. So they never limited my career choices per se. However, when I voiced that that's what I wanted to do for work, my dad, very smartly, by the way, decided that he would introduce me to a couple of people who were already doing that, and I could ask any questions that I wanted. And I suppose it didn't help that these friends were both men. And the men very bluntly and blatantly told me that, well, look, if you want to be a plastic surgeon, this is what your life is going to look like. You're going to be working a lot. There's a lot of plastic surgeons or surgeons in general that drink because they can't go with the job. You know, you might not have time.
Reassuring.
I know, you might not have too much time for your family. And they sort of turned me off from that path. Similar thing when it came to the choice of being a diplomat. You know, what will happen if you travel as a female diplomat and your husband would have to sort of feel secondary and have to travel after you? And to think in this day and age, 2023, that you would hear advice like that, or we would give advice like that, to us may be shocking, but in that context, in that society, those were genuine concerns that these would. And I thought, you know what, I probably don't want that path. And that's all it took for me to say, okay, that doesn't seem like the right career choice for me. And it is quite sad. It is quite sad, yeah.
Yeah, that's too bad. And it's so frustrating to think that this also happens a lot, because we still have that image of, well, what you were saying before, right? Like women being the main person to keep the house clean, feed the children, blah, 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 being like really, I saw someone saying being like some sort of project manager of home.
Absolutely.
Which is very much that, like all the planning, all that effort into how to, like managing basically everything. Like a home is so much work. And it's so annoying to think that, because they do make a valid point, like how do you manage that if you do want a family and you want a career? How do you manage that? But also annoyingly, I'm sure they didn't have to think too much of that because they had a woman who was doing that. It's really infuriating.
But absolutely. But you know, times are changing, and I hear very, very different narratives now, in both in the UK and in Armenia. I see girls that do have way more possibilities, and there's so many STEM programs and role models, and I think we've come a very, very long way. It's just a question of making sure that's accessible to, people from all walks of life, to girls who, don't necessarily live in urban environments, or we just need to make sure that it's accessible all around, not to specific private school environments in central cities. And but yeah, we've come a long way.
Definitely. Thank you so much for sharing. I'm looking at my question and we've anticipated quite a lot of them, which is really nice. Yeah. So we've talked about the lack of representation of women like in society and how the impact it had on you on like a professional path. Was there any other like aspects of your life where you wish you had more representation?
Maybe before I answer that, I just want to say that even whenever I did meet women, that had quite important roles in society, or rather, maybe not roles in society, but we're talking about career and profession, right? So if I did meet women who were doctors and had senior civil servant positions or whatnot, what I did notice, and what I noticed to this day, is that women, at least in my environment anyway, this might be very, very different in specific environments in London per se, but back home I noticed that it's not something that women brag about, you see. So meet a man who happens to be a CEO or a civil servant or politician or some kind of important position, that's really all they talk about. But for women, I noticed that not only do they not talk about it, share it and brag about it, but they kind of tend to almost put it a secondary role, in their life. And I think it would have helped to have met these women who are doctors, etc., who could have shared just how passionate they are about their job, or how the difference that they're making, that they believe they're making. I noticed that, correct me if you think I'm wrong, but I noticed that women are very, well, by nature, again, I don't want to generalize, but I think women tend to be a little bit more agreeable on average. And we're also more adaptable to different situations and environments. So if you are in a more familiar environment, you might just adapt to that environment and pause talking about work or bragging about work. Or I think we separate ourselves, or we take on different roles. I think that's what I want to say. We take on very, very different roles. But I would have liked to see women also extend their professional passions to other domains of life as well, so that you can see that being a CEO or being a doctor is very important. What they do is important, and they should talk about it outside of work as well.
Yeah. I completely agree. The one thing where I'm not sure, and I don't know if it would ever be possible to look at that anyway, but is it by nature or is it by socialization, because I think we've also really been socialized to adapt and do what other people want us to do, and especially in the workplace, where that a lot of people or like some men rather, slash a lot of men, are very fast at pointing out, oh, she's bragging too much, she's too this, blah 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 blah. Like, think of like a woman or like a person being angry. If they're a man, they're gonna be like, it's gonna be perceived as good, whereas if it's a woman, she's on her period. Like, that's the common joke. So yeah, and it's too bad because especially when people have passion but kind of prevent themselves from bragging about that.
I definitely know what you mean, and I think I noticed as well throughout my career, I did die myself down a lot. You know, my volume and the way I would behave and the way I would dress. Very, very early on in my career as well, I learned to underdress because I didn't want that to be the main point of focus as a you know, young woman in a slightly more corporate environment. And I definitely know what you mean. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, I bet you must observe that as well with your clients. In recruitment, it must be.
Yes, as the face of the company in general, you know, I do try. I want to. It's also an interesting observation. It's something I realized, but I want to say 90%, if not 100% of my clients, the people that I interact with and onboard are men, you know, because my clients are the main decision makers. So they're founders of startups or CEOs of startups. And no matter how hard I try to extend that pool, my clients are men. And in interaction with them, I don't necessarily think I'm a woman and you're a man. That's not how I approach it. But there are times when I am aware of it. And I have to say something a little bit controversial as well, and people might disagree with me, but there's also advantages to being a woman sometimes in these sorts of environments, because I have noticed that the occasional smile or empathy or being able to put yourself in the shoes of the other person has made a difference in many business situations. And I'm not saying that it's only women that do that, but because we're more on average more conscientious and agreeable, we tend to also notice these things in the other person. And so in many ways it has helped me being a woman. But just going back to the point that we were mentioning as well, you know, it made me think of have you heard of the book Women Who Run with the Wolves?
No.
Yeah, highly recommend for anyone who's not read it. And it's a difficult book to read, by the way. It took me a long time. But through different stories of folklore and fairy tales and mystical tales, the author, who I believe, if I'm not mistaken, is an academic in the subject, shares more about how, you know, women have this wild woman inside of us that's been tamed by society, and we have learned to not listen to that inner wild woman, and that actually the best way forward in life is to reconnect with that wild woman and to truly allow yourself to be yourself and not to be afraid to be your authentic self and your wild woman self, right? And that is the way for us to just embrace ourselves and succeed by not having to quiet ourselves or, you know, be different or be acceptable and be agreeable and etc. So I do recommend it. It's a really good book.
Oh, great. Thank you. Yeah, I'll put it in the show notes. So interesting. Yeah. And it's also like hearing you talk, you know, even when you have your opinions here on this podcast, you do say, oh, people might not agree, etc. And like when I compare, especially to people at work, like we have quite a few white cis straight men at work who would be like, you know, absolutely like, oh yeah, I say that, hence it's the only truth. And it's so, I mean, like a lot of my friends and like me and like a lot of other women who I know, like there is always this as well, where it's like even telling your opinion, you're also kind of mindful of the fact that it is an opinion based on your own
beliefs or
and experience.
I mean, I see it as an advantage though, I have to say, because I think that's such a skill. I almost feel sorry for the men who don't have that skill, for us to be able to not be considerate per se, but to be aware that there are people out there who think differently or who might view. I think that's this is why you need to hire more women.
Yes.
You know, right? Because we do have that. We're just a bit
completely.
more, we pick up on these things. We pick up on signals a bit better. Yeah.
Definitely. And do you currently have any female role model?
Gosh, it's a good question. I can't think of if you're trying to get me to think of a celebrity or a businesswoman, or I can't think of a specific name. I can say that I do feel inspired every now and then if I bump into a YouTube video or a podcast where I do see a woman who's succeeded and gives authentic, genuine advice of how to embrace all your strengths and weaknesses and, you know, do your best. That kind of advice, hearing from a successful woman, I do admire, and I could easily take that person as a role model. In general, I think I have a problem with having a role model because I don't like the idea of putting someone on a pedestal. Because we're all human, we all make mistakes and errors, and I wouldn't want to look up to someone too much. You know, I still look up to the women in my family and in my life, in my friend circle. I very, very much admire every single woman that comes along my way, and I feel very proud of all of their achievements and vulnerabilities. And so I want to say, yes, role model women in my life. I admire them on a daily basis, and I think, if anything, that helps. Yeah,
great. Thank you for sharing. I'd like to jump on kind of the second part of the podcast where we kind of talk more about a project or achievement that you want to talk about. So what can you present it? Like, say what you want to talk about.
All right. Well, I think I would talk about what it is that I do for a living. Which is, you know, I started working with the startup world about 4 years ago, and I find the whole industry very, very exciting, and a lot of the innovation that we have in our lives that we kind of take it for granted now, you know, is a result of very cool startup products and companies that have come about to be successful and innovative. And I got involved in that world because I wanted to see, it hit me that to be able to create very good, successful, innovative products, you obviously, goes without saying, have to have the right people in place. And because I worked in HR and recruitment all my career, I saw the ins and outs of how people get hired, and, you know, how there's so much bias in the recruitment process, in the selection process. And when we started our company with my twin brother, by the way, you know, we wanted to work with these really cool startups and help them grow, but ensure that we're doing it. That's why we call it an advisory rather than an agency, because we want to ensure that we're doing it from a point of educating, for the lack of a better word, you know, just making them more and more aware continuously. There's always bias in place in a recruitment process. That's just the fact. There's always bias in place. But there are many things you can do to decrease that bias or to avoid that bias at different points, you know, starting from how you reach out to people, what kind of language you use as well in your vacancies and job descriptions, how you interview people, what kinds of questions you ask, you know, how you judge their CV and their application documents. So every single step includes a lot of bias, and what we're trying to do whilst helping these startups grow with the right talent is ensure that the bias is kept at the absolute minimal level. And, you know, we're not discriminating or judging people at face value, and we're giving them a chance. And, you know, that you hire people, not CVs, and the grass is not always greener. And and we just need to be more inclusive and more aware of difference being a good thing, and different skills being of value. And that's also what I try and instill in the other department, which is working with candidates who try to find their ideal job, just to be a little bit more open-minded and try and decrease our bias day to day, because humanity is diversity. there's beauty in diversity of opinions, skills, capabilities, and that's just something we need to finally start embracing. And there's a lot of companies that are trying to do that, but unfortunately it's often words and not actions. And I mean, the kind of stuff I've heard, you know, at work is just, if I tell you some of the stories, you probably wouldn't believe, although nothing surprises me anymore. But I have heard, you know, I meet a lot of people. I do a lot of calls with founders and CEOs and candidates, and yeah, some of the stuff I've heard, even from very seemingly intelligent people. There was this I doubt very much he would ever listen to this podcast, but there was this man who was going to be a client of mine, German person, male person, and he was kind of trying to tell me what kind of people he would like to target to grow his startup, and he was being very selective in the types of adjectives that he was using, but you know, it's his right. If he believes he needs more X people or white people, whatnot, I'm very open to hearing. But he started talking about my own people, my own country. But I'm sure he meant to give a compliment, but the choice of words was quite condescending. And I just let him finish, and at the end I said, well, yes, you know, I am Armenian myself. And it is true, we have very smart people. It's a great you know, job market to target. And I tried to be very calm and patient, but I don't think he ever realized that his vocabulary, his choice of words was condescending, and you know, that he was being very biased, and bear in mind there's a lot of positive stereotypes as well, right? Positive and negative stereotypes. So that's just one, but you know, I've heard a lot of preferring to hire men for specific positions, or even in the most, you know, I do tell my friends sometimes, I have a few friends that live in very, very seemingly progressive societies, and when I tell them this is the experience that I had with the founder from the Netherlands or from Germany or from whatnot, and they just do not believe that when I tell them that actually this is what they told me, you know. So there is a lot of bias out there which we need to continue fighting.
Yeah, definitely.
That was a really long answer. I'm sorry.
That was so interesting. Oh my god, don't be sorry. Like, that was so interesting to hear about. And yeah, especially in a job like yours where it's kind of the essence to talk about people. You must hear things that I don't even want to imagine. It must be like...
The amount of times, and this might be shocking to some people who don't necessarily work in recruitment, who are currently applying for jobs, the amount of times that people make a hiring decision based on vibes or how they felt, or, I mean, you know, there's some facts that are just crazy, depending on the color you wear to the interview, or you know, how quickly you smile in the first 5 minutes. It can be very, very important factor in whether they will invite you to the next interview or not. And yeah, the amount of times I've heard people say, I don't know, I just didn't feel a vibe.
It's also so interesting because it's like, ideally, you do want to get along with your coworker, like that's always better. But also it's like based on a like 10 minutes thing, and at the same time it's like, what is going on in your brain that you like, it's so many different factors. It's so interesting. It must be fascinating to hear from not recruiters, but people who are doing the interview at the company after, and hear everything.
Oh yes, and the type of patience that you develop as well too. I mean, there are things you need to correct sometimes, you know, there are things that you have to voice regardless of if it's a client, or there are things you have to say. I can't walk across a comment of, you know, when they specifically tell me they need to have a man in a position, or there are things that I have to voice and have to comment on, but yes, you do need to develop patience of steel.
And so how long was there between the first time you kind of thought about it and the time it actually happened?
The project? Surprisingly not long at all. And I tell you why, because prior to this I was running my own thing. I was working for myself for 2 years. I was trying my best at starting an education technology startup myself.
Cool.
And if anyone's hearing this and they want to start something on their own, I strongly recommend to not do it alone. That was really, really tough. I mean, I did my best and I achieved some things, and I like to say that I beautifully failed at the end. And I learned a lot from that experience. But so this idea of starting something with my brother was actually my mother's idea.
Oh.
Because she saw that there's a lot of that we can work well together. We do work very well together. And we talked about it, we thought about it, we thought, okay, what is something that, you know, we're very good at? What is something that can be of value? What is something that we're passionate about? And we just combined those three things together, and there we were. We started. I mean, it helped to have some network in the industry. It helped to have some people who were already interested to come to us and use our services. But I think some of the best things happen when you don't overthink it. And that's what we did. We went all in. We didn't overthink. We started overthinking later down the line. Yes, but in the beginning we did not. Yeah.
That's really cool. So how did you do it?
Oh. So we had the idea from my mother. And we had a chat with my brother about how, you know, what it would look like. We knew that we had to commit to this fully. But of course, financially, you know, you don't really start making money in the beginning straight away. So we kind of kept our part-time jobs and started putting all our efforts into this. But soon it became somewhat of a full-time commitment. And then we just, you know, grew systems and processes in place, bought everything we needed to buy, and experimented with a couple of things, you know, marketing, online presence, basic website, domain, email, and first couple of clients. And truth be told, we did experiment on the first 2 clients.
Yeah.
But I think when you come into something having expertise and experience and being sure that you're doing it for the right reasons, it tends to work out. Yeah.
Oh, that's a beautiful message.
Yes, do it. Whoever's thinking of doing something, I'm a big proponent of side hustles and starting something of your own if you have that. Because don't get me wrong, this is sugar coated. Running your own business or being a solopreneur, entrepreneur is really, really hard as well. You just have, it's commitment, it's, you know, it's time, effort, money, and but if you're passionate about something, and you have not just passionate, but it has to be a product or service that people will pay for, right?
Yeah.
But if you've sold it a couple of times, if you see some interest for people who want to pay, go for it. Definitely go for it.
Yeah. That's really, really cool. I was going to ask if there was any important, like anyone who had an impact on it, but I guess you talked a bit about your mom already, which is so interesting.
Also, funny enough, you know, my ex-boss, who is a man, so not entirely relevant to the discussion we're having, but I have to say, this is the thing when we talk about, you know, differences between men and women and differences at work and whatnot. I mean, I've had really, really good experiences as well with my male colleagues and male managers. And actually, you know, I was talking to a friend last week about this who was sort of complaining to me about her female manager. And she was saying, well, you know, why is it that when you have women managers, you know, they're not as nice to you as the men managers sometimes, you know, they're supposed to mentor you and be a role model, but usually it's the opposite. And it's sad to say that it's very, very often the case. I don't know what the reason behind it is. I mean, we can probably get into it and talk for 5 hours about it. But,
definitely.
you know, but I had really good experience with my male manager who really took me under his wing super, super early on in my career. I was very young and dumb and naive. I was a recent graduate, and he just totally took me under his wing. And he would take me to like shareholder meetings, and he just saw that I was super curious and I wanted to learn everything, so he taught me everything. So in many ways, because I learned a lot with him, and because he kind of instilled that confidence in me that you can do this, I think it was a catalyst in believing that yes, I could do this on my own. So in many ways I'm thankful to him as well, because he put me in a lot of positions where I was maybe that's gonna sound wrong. That I had to just be outside of my comfort zone. Yeah.
Where you could learn.
Exactly.
Yeah. And it's so... I was talking about that in therapy the other day, but like,
tell us.
So my thing, as a lot of other people, I struggle asking for help, and my therapist was explaining to me how when you're someone like me, you sometimes go ask people who you know are not going to help you, and this comforts you in the fact that you can't ask for help, and then the thing that you kind of have to do is go to someone who you know is going to help you, so that you experiment safely. And it's like, I kind of hear that that's kind of what he made you do, right? He kind of made you experiment safe, like in a safe way, where you do get out of your comfort, but also you have that space to fail, and if you do, it's fine. Does that make sense?
That's so incredibly interesting what you're saying. I never thought of it that way. I also have that problem. It's actually quite a problem in my life. And funny enough, at work, I'm in many ways so different to my personal life. Well, in the beginning, it was very hard to delegate. That took me a long time to learn to delegate. But I also have that problem of asking for help. And I'm sure you'll agree with me. It's largely because of the way we're raised, to be sacrificial and to put others first. And I definitely have a problem with putting myself first in many
oh my god, same.
So I'm sure anyone hearing this, if you're a woman, you can relate. But it's so interesting that you say that. I am going to experiment with it. Go ask for help with people who will help. And by the way, whoever comes to me, they know that I will definitely help. Yeah, that's very interesting.
Yeah,
that's good advice.
It is. Like, I love my therapist.
Yes. Okay. Free advice for us from your therapist.
Literally. Your manager sounds like, or like your previous manager, a very helpful person.
Yeah.
And confidence in doing things. It's so important so many times.
Yeah.
It's just like,
Do you know of the 5-second rule? I think it's, what's her name? Mel Robbins?
Oh, that rings a bell.
She's a motivational type of speaker, I want to say, but she promotes this thing where, obviously fear holds us back a lot.
Yeah.
I want to say especially women.
Yeah.
But it does hold many, many people back. And the thing she promotes is the 5-second rule, which is that, when fear is holding you back from doing something that could be good for you, that will be good for you, count down from 5 to 1 and then just do it. Sounds incredibly simple, I know, and but whenever I have tried it, at the most difficult moments, it has helped me. Whether it's to exercise, to go into a meeting, or I remember sales just being excruciating for me, the idea of having to talk to a stranger on the phone and to sell them something. But the 5-second rule does wonders. Because really, what's the worst thing that can happen?
Yeah, completely. And most of the time, actually good things happen. So yeah, that's so interesting. I need to start applying that.
Try. You might fail, which is completely okay as well in the beginning, but then it might work.
Yeah, and even when you fail, you always learn. When you said earlier that you failed beautifully in your previous project, it's also super interesting because if you had not done it, there's probably a lot of things that you would have missed that you learn that help you for your current project. And it's so interesting to see just kind of do it, because again, what's the risk that can happen? Like, nothing happens.
Definitely. Definitely. And I was talking to a friend last week about this concept of luck, because we were talking about, the recent trend of the lucky girl syndrome.
Oh, no.
So I keep seeing the phrase all over social media, and the BBC wrote an article. And I saw the phrase, but I could never quite understand what it was. So it turns out the lucky girl syndrome, for whoever out there who doesn't know yet, is this idea that it's a little bit similar to affirmations and manifestations, but it goes one step further, which is that if you tell yourself, as a girl every day in front of a mirror or whatnot, I'm lucky. I don't know, by the way, if this is the correct way, but I was lucky today that all the lights were green when I was driving, or just keep telling yourself and believing that you're lucky supposedly brings luck, or rather maybe you start noticing luck a bit more in your life. I haven't done it. I'm not sure if that's my cup of tea, but we're talking with a friend, and she was kind of telling me about this other project, and we said that essentially what is luck? Luck is putting yourself in unusual situations, in new situations, because if you keep to your same routine every day, see the same people, chances are luck's not really there. But if you meet new people and you go to new places and change your routine, and that's where luck is peeking in, I guess.
Yeah. When I was younger, I considered myself a very lucky person. And once I told that to my mom, who did a bachelor and master's degree in psychology.
Ooh, you're a child of a psychology student.
Psychology, who then became a teacher, hence I need therapy now.
Okay, yes.
And she told me that actually there is like some psychology behind it, and it's like, you're not actually lucky, but because you believe you are, you have a tendency to see only the good things or something like that. I can't really remember. But the other day I also saw a video on Instagram, I think. I have not fact-checked what she was saying, but I thought it was really interesting. She was saying that the sort of science behind manifestation is that if you do that in the morning, there is apparently that part, again, I have not fact-checked that, so but apparently there's supposed to be that part of your brain where basically what you do in the morning has a big influence on how you're going to feel the rest of your day and what you're going to focus on. And by manifesting, you're basically training that part of your brain to focus on these things, because your brain can't focus on everything at just at once, so it kind of like triage kind of all the time. And so by doing this manifestation, basically what you're doing is telling your brain, I want to focus on this today. I want you to like give me these points, and like these are the ones important to me. I actually do want to like check this, because if it is true, and if it is like, it's really interesting. Yeah, just like training your mind basically.
Yeah, I'm gonna look that up.
Yeah, I'll do some research and put again the show notes so that everyone can benefit from it. But I thought it was fascinating. Just like a lot of things that you deem as luck or something like that, it's just your brain. It's just your brain doing things that you have no idea it's doing. It's so funny.
Yeah, we need to look into this because it sounds straightforward. So we might as well give it a go and experiment.
But I had never heard of the lucky girl syndrome.
That's the thing. I don't know if it's a trend or there's anything good that can come out of it, but yes, do look it up. And even if it is a trend, just use whatever could be helpful for yourself.
Yeah, completely. Because also, even if it's not true but it makes you happy, like if it doesn't harm you, if it doesn't prevent you from making decisions based on like also reality, it's always like fun tools to use.
Absolutely. The key thing is just to stay true to yourself, and even if you're using affirmations or whatever, the lucky girl syndrome thing, just be honest with yourself, be your true self, embrace your true self, and focus on more internal things than external things, and then you'll all be fine. Preachy.
And what challenges have you faced
in life?
As well, if you will. I was thinking more of like in this, in creating your company.
Oh gosh.
But also, if you want to talk about the rest of your life, please.
We don't have enough time for that. The very, very typical challenges of running your own business. Very typical challenges. Things like, I think the one thing that we often forget, or maybe we know but we don't quite embrace it, is that when you do start your own business, even if you're doing it with a co-founder, you're everything. You're your admin specialist, you're your head of marketing, you're the head of sales, and you're head of delivery, and head of customer service, and so that was really hard in the beginning because, yes, you work a lot. People say, screw 9 to 5, I'm going to start my own thing. And but yes, when you just start your own thing, you do a 9 to 9. So So that's just something that we still struggle with, and we try to, I know perfectly well how unhealthy it is to work a lot, and I'm trying to work on that. But there are many days and evenings where I finish at 9 or 10. And so yes, one of the hardest things was that you had to learn a lot. I mean, the amount of things that I've learned, running a company, starting from SEO to PPC to email marketing, and how to actually qualify a lead for sales, and how to talk to really, the amount of things that both myself and the co-founder, aka my brother, have learned is massive. And I think this is such a important life experience. But then, once you learn things and you put specific processes and systems in place for things to run themselves and for you not to overwork, then you have to also learn about hiring the right people and delegating and trusting them. And it's one stage at a time. When you're completely new venture or project or company, the challenges are very different. When you've grown to a specific revenue and number of clients and you're selling your services, the challenges are very different. And then when you're at a stage when you're scaling and growing or launching new departments, the challenges are very different. So there's always challenges, but you just need to learn to hire people who can do what you can't do, learn to delegate, and just remind yourself why it is that you're doing what you're doing. For me, sometimes there is an imbalance of passion and profit mindset. Sometimes the passion overtakes and I forget about the profit mindset. Yeah. But then I get reminded.
Then you have to pay your rent. And
Exactly. That really, you're running a business because you want to make a profit. That's the reality of things. Otherwise, you'd be working for someone else. But you also need to do something you love. So it's just about balance.
Yeah, it must be very interesting to do that on your own terms, though.
Yeah, that's very cool. I do say, people do ask me, oh, would you like to work for someone? And I think I would, because I think there's still a lot to learn in different companies and teams. And, I'm still 6-7 years in a career is nothing given how much you can still learn. But the idea that I would have to have a manager and, goals and KPIs that are not my own, that I would struggle with.
Yeah. And was there, in building this company, was there anything that was easier than you thought would be?
Well, so one thing, a lot of people kind of don't want to start their business or their project because they think I would have to invest a lot. And the one thing that was the case with us was we actually didn't invest a lot in the beginning. If you are going to be selling a product, obviously the investments are more significant. If you are selling a service that is sellable, then the investments really are not significant. I mean, think about it. What would you need? You would need some kind of branding, basic website, software, or you could really start with minimal investment. Of course, that would have to increase, with time, because then your expenses increase as well with your revenue. But in the beginning, you don't need a lot of investment. So that's the one thing that I could maybe share with people, that if it's money holding you back, don't let it be the thing that's holding you back. If it's expertise holding you back, do all possible courses you can, and talk to the right people, learn as much as you can. Don't let things hold you back. I understand completely. I do have friends that say, oh, but I need the money. I can't start something and not have a regular income come in every month. Again, people are in different life situations. If you have a family or if you're saving towards something, that's definitely something you need to consider. But other than that, don't let anything else hold you back.
Cool. Thank you for sharing. And why does this make you proud of yourself?
Oh boy. Proud of myself. Most of the time I feel the opposite of that. And then I hear a lot of validation from my friends and family of, how great I'm doing. But most of the time when you're in it, you don't see your successes, or you don't see sometimes a difference that you're making. And it could be one step forwards, 2 steps back. You could be doing really, really well one quarter and then not so well the next quarter. But what does make me feel proud, I suppose, is how far I've come in my knowledge and in my experience and in my expertise. You know, what great companies I've managed to work with. I mean, sometimes when I look at and I think, wow, you know, they trusted us. Or I love working with candidates as well, you know, helping them job hunt and secure a job offer, because the difference that has made in some people's lives. I mean, I love it. The fact that I could have helped someone. I mean, I did help someone get hired into that company, into that role. You know, the right job can change a person's life. I have had candidates who've met the love of their life, you know, at work. I've had candidates who, you know, changed complete industries and roles and directions, and so many things have changed with the right job. So that makes me feel very proud that I know that what I do matters and it makes a difference, and it changes lives. Yeah.
That's very beautiful, and that's what we're going to conclude on. Thank you so much. It was such a great discussion. Before we end, is there anything that we didn't talk about that you'd like to mention now?
Just because we're on the topic of, you know, women and women in specific professions or careers or business, I do want to say, you know, I still believe in girl power, and I very much believe in, if you reach out and build a community and ask for help and ask for guidance or advice, you know, people do want to give that help. When people reach out to me and just ask for tips and recommendations, or want to I should say girls. I mean, people as well, but when girls reach out to me and ask to get a cup of coffee and to talk to me and advice, I'm more than willing and more than happy to do it. So yes, do embrace the girl community and use it as much as you can, because, you know, we're all in this to pay it forward, I think. So take advantage of that. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. Thank you so much for everything. It's such an interesting discussion. I very much enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. You gave awesome tips. Now I need to go and look things up and find the book that you mentioned as well.
Yeah, I'll put everything in the notes. I can send it to you as well.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Pleasure shared. And in this podcast, the guest always gets the very last word. The mic is yours.
Okay. Just be kind to yourself and be patient with yourself.